I just can't truly recommend you use any other router. Are not just going to be cool for some advanced use cases, but could change the way we think about components and building routed applications.
And that is Tanner Linsley. You may know Tanner as the creator of React Query or the entire ecosystem known as TanStack. A true developer at heart, Tanner first encountered and solved complex challenges at Nozzle, where he started off as a developer and later on became a co-founder. What began as solving complex challenges internally at Nozzle evolved into powerful open source tools that are used by developers worldwide.
If I were to learn magic, I wouldn't want somebody to hand me a single magical black box that I don't understand how it works. I would want to be handed a toolkit of a bunch of different things that are all magical that I know how to put together and rearrange how I want.
And today, millions of developers from Fortune 500 companies like Apple and Google, all the way to budding startups and indie projects, rely on TanStack's powerful libraries. Now, React Query alone, also known as TanStack Query, has over 20 million downloads. So in this specific episode, we are going to dive deep into the architectural decision that shaped the TanStack ecosystem.
I wanted to have a system that felt like the priority was the client, and that the server side parts, which were still possible, were more opt-in instead of the other way around, which is what it feels like a lot today.
Tanner's unique take on React server components.
Server components are really just another kind of data. It would be like instead of JSON, it's RSC, but it's still just data that you're getting from the server and then showing to your users somehow.
The journey of building type-safe APIs and how they shouldn't be an afterthought.
And I just don't like exposing APIs that are too magical.
Tanner's vision for TanStack Start.
I have a surprise coming for TanStack Start specifically.
His advice for budding developers that just want to be like him, and so much more. And a special shout out to all the incredible maintainers of the TanStack ecosystem. Their countless contributions have been instrumental in shaping TanStack into powerful solutions that developers rely on today. So let's dive in. Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining in. I am so excited that Tanner has joined us today. Thank you so much and welcome to my channel.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, this is very exciting. As you can already see, I'm like a little kid with a candy dancing around. I'm like, yes, we are doing this. I'm excited after talking to you at React Rally. It was such an amazing time. So anyway, for those folks who don't know you already and don't have the privilege to know you yet, please introduce yourself really quickly, and we can go from there.
Well, I've been programming for about 20 years now, and 10 years ago, I started a business with some friends, and we got really deep into SEO and marketing and analytics, and I built some software that really stretched my skills. And over those 10 years, I ended up building a lot of open source libraries that we used at that company. It's called Nozzle, and Nozzle's still around today. It's awesome software. If you're in marketing, you should go check it out. But a lot of that open source software turned into TanStack. So it's just a collection of libraries, mainly for front end and web development that we have built to help you do some amazing things. Anything from building tables and data grids to data synchronization and fetching and virtualization. We're building a framework now. So it's kind of just whatever the harder problems are in front end, we want to be there solving them. So
that's awesome, and thank you so much for your contributions in general, because I have used it a lot over the years and definitely made my life so much better. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks. Yeah, helped me out too.
Yeah. So I want to quickly just learn more about your experience at the company. So what got you to start that company? It seems like, based on your other interviews as well, that was a company where you solved a lot of really interesting problems. And what got you to starting that journey there?
Well, in the beginning, I was learning Angular actually, and I met my founders and co-founders at a meetup for Angular. Actually, it was the same meetup where I met Kent C. Dodds, crazy enough, and he was giving his first talk. So it was kind of a very pivotal meetup. But I met my co-founders there, and they were working for SEO.com at the time, like the SEO.com. And
Mm-hmm.
they were building wonderful technology there. But they're an agency, and they wanted to grow the tech into something more. And the agency was going to just kind of keep going
Mm-hmm.
with services. So they needed somebody to come in on the front end and build a great app. And I was a novice, but they thought I was good enough. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually came on to Nozzle first as an employee, and then they
Mm-hmm.
later made me a co-founder. But yeah, we found a lot of interesting problems there where we were reverse engineering Google. We're doing searches on your behalf for Google
Mm-hmm.
keywords in different languages and on different devices. Millions, I think now billions of them every day, and scraping the results of those search results and putting them into large columnar store databases. And it became like a big data analytical problem very quickly. And it was a small team too. There were only three of us initially, and we needed to accomplish a lot with just three people. So we relied a lot on tools and technology and things to make us able to build a product like that with as little effort as possible.
No, that's really awesome. And I'm imagining that there were a lot of like client interactions and interactivity in your applications, which is why I guess it led to the TAN stack, right? Like with tables and virtualization and so much more.
But yeah, we had a lot of client interactions that like pushed us.
Mm.
We at one point we had Google's third largest AdWords customer using our software, and they were breaking our system every day with how much they
Mm-hmm.
were putting through it. So we quickly had to scale up into very advanced use cases very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Where usually you would build a skateboard and then a go kart and then a car, we quickly had to jump to, we need to build this really complex big system to handle these massive enterprise clients, and yet we still didn't have self-service onboarding and billing, which feels backwards to a lot of people, but
Yeah.
that's how it ended up. That's how
Yeah.
where our customers came from. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely very entrepreneurial. And I think I can see that in TanStack as a whole as well. I guess my question would be like, what got you to start TanStack Start?
well, honestly, a lot of it started with, I mean, it's all been building up since I started building Query.
Mm-hmm.
But I built Query, got into data fetching. That made me want more out of other systems that data fetching was touching in our system.
Mm-hmm.
One of those was the router. And then after I kind of dove into the router, I had ended up building my own router
Mm-hmm.
that could do a lot of really cool, neat new things. Kind of taking the best ideas I could from Next.js and from Remix, and also putting in a lot of my own ideas from Query.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where I was going to stop, because that's really all I needed for
Mm-hmm.
Nozzle, is I mostly just wanted this type safe router. But I quickly learned that like a framework, like a full stack framework, if we talk about a meta framework,
Mm-hmm.
it's like 90% the router.
Yep.
And then the rest of it is just kind of this server environment that can be difficult to figure out, but
Mm-hmm.
is relatively a small surface area and pretty widely agreed upon in terms of how it should work among framework authors. I kind of came to a point where a lot of people started asking me for full stack solutions built on top of this new
Mm-hmm.
router.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a ton of users yet, but
Mm-hmm.
there was already some very serious users of router who were switching
Mm-hmm.
over SaaS applications and wanting to build new things on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And SSR came up very quickly. How do I
Mm-hmm.
server render? How can I use a backend for front end? Can I do server functions? And people
Mm-hmm.
started asking about React server components.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no React server components without server. So
Mm-hmm.
I quickly needed to figure out that story.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a great opportunity to go full time on TanStack
Mm-hmm.
and really like devote all of my time and energy into it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
decided to start building the framework and doing that. And it's been about 6 months since I started that full stack or sorry, that full-time TanStack journey.
Yeah, and it's really awesome because I feel like in just 6 months, you have achieved so much. Like, only hearing about TanStack these days, and I think it's really cool. So, I guess would love to understand a bit more about the architectural decisions that got you to building TanStack Start, and how did you leverage, I guess, Query? Because from what I see, that you always had these pieces together that was so strong and solid on its own that I just felt like TanStack Start is like a powerhouse of all of those individually powerful features as well. So yeah, I would love to know your architectural decisions there.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities between other tools that people like. There's clear boundaries between client and server, but one of the most important things I think is that TanStack Router is 90% of it. And TanStack Router is built hopefully to behave as much like a traditional client-side SPA application that as it can, right? Um, it's definitely not a server first router or a server first framework. It assumes you're going to have JavaScript on the page. It assumes that you're looking for really highly interactive experiences, and it assumes you're going to be using tools to build applications. Things like query and heavy data concerns, data that's changing a lot. One of the things that really stands out, I think, though, is that every other meta framework, which is mostly in the React space, it's mostly just Remix and Next.js. They have a really heavy focus on the server, both from a technical standpoint and a marketing standpoint, and just the developer experience. You can tell that they put the server very first. Even though they can do client-side things, you can feel the priority in their system for the server.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to have a system that felt like the priority was the client, like that the priority was, a fully hydrated application, and that the server side parts, which were still possible, were more opt-in instead of the other way around, which is what it feels like a lot today, where everything is server first and then you opt into client-specific
Yeah.
APIs or client-specific things. I wanted the opposite, because those are the types of things that I'm building. I'm building applications.
Yeah.
I'm not building a lot of e-commerce, custom e-commerce. I'm not building a lot of, content distribution websites where a lot of it is like, kind of static content, but it's also changing dynamically a lot. Like, no, I build dashboards, and I build widgets, and filtering and data grid experiences. So I needed something that was going to be friendlier to that experience, and I think a lot of developers are there. And they're just kind of being dragged along with this server first approach. That's the overarching difference in motivations for the framework.
Yeah.
And that in turn is what influences all of the decisions about the API. So when you go to use TanStack Start, you're building a client side first routing experience. It assumes that you're hydrated, and everything you write is isomorphic and client first. And when you want to, say, use the server, you explicitly have to opt into server only things. So one of the most obvious ones is SSR. And
Yeah.
SSR is interesting because you can do SSR isomorphically. We've been doing that for a really long time.
Yeah.
And all that means is you're basically doing the same thing on the server as you're doing on the client to render that first HTML. After that, where it gets a little more complex, where as the user's navigating through pages, the isomorphic approach can get a little dirty because you might be communicating directly with APIs in the client and on the server, and it gets a little confusing about where code is executing. So we decided, so on top of the server layering that we have with TanStack Start, we added SSR, but we also added kind of more traditional approach to server only stuff, which is
Mm-hmm.
API routes. So
Mm-hmm.
you can build API routes just like you can with Next.js or Remix, and it's just request response. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very straightforward. You can use tools like TRPC. You could even
Mm-hmm.
spin up your own Hano server
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted. So it plays very friendly just with kind of your regular full stack server side logic
Mm-hmm.
approaches. But I wanted it to be even simpler because so a lot of the apps that I build or have built in the past, I've had a team on the back end building an API for me in a completely different language. We're communicating over gRPC using Proto and
Yep.
so a lot of this full stack TypeScript stuff kind of just goes out the window, and you kind of ask yourself, okay, how do I want to interact with those APIs? Our API routes aren't something that I wanted to use because I already have an API. I don't want to
Yep.
have to rebuild an API just to do some custom logic for myself
Yeah.
before I talk again to my backend API. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where, for a while now, I've been very interested in RPCs, the
Mm-hmm.
ability to, create RPCs right inside your code that doesn't feel as heavy as, building an API route per se,
Mm-hmm.
but still allows you to execute some server side logic and communicate with your API from a server aspect. What we built were server functions. So with server functions, you can create backend logic with
Mm-hmm.
just a function. It looks a lot like React server functions actually, but they have nothing to do with React.
Mm-hmm.
They're just functions that get extracted at build time out of the client and
Yeah.
replaced with an RPC so that when you call that function from within your code, it sends the request to the backend on your behalf,
Mm-hmm.
executes on the server, and then sends the request back to the client. And likewise, if you're already on the server during SSR, it doesn't change anything. It just calls the function. And you might have seen this concept in frameworks like Quick.
Mm-hmm.
Solid also has this, and I really really like it because it gives you quick access to the server without
Mm-hmm.
having to mentally and cognitively go through API routes
Yeah.
and build an API. If I were to sell it to somebody on each framework for Next.js, it would
Mm-hmm.
almost be like having get server side props, but you could use it anywhere and create as many of them as you wanted. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
tied to pages. And if it
Mm-hmm.
was for Remix, it's like a loader in a route,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
has nothing to do with the router or any. It's just a function that you can call that will only execute on the server,
Mm-hmm.
and that's awesome because now you can build your application like an SPA, a client side
Yeah.
SPA, and when you need something to happen only on the server, you just create this server function, put your logic in there, and you're
Mm-hmm.
done. You know that
Mm-hmm.
it will only execute on the server, and you can communicate with it as you wish.
What I really love about is the APIs for how TanStack Start exposes those functions as well. So it's very explicit. So users know that they're opting into it versus, the other way around where things are there by default, which I'm not a big fan of. So I really
Yeah,
love that the framework has taken that into consideration.
and not just. I mean, there's something to say there because I feel like the industry is moving into a very magical place. I mean, we saw Next.js just released their latest version, and they added yet another directive that you
Yep.
can use called use cache. And I just don't like exposing APIs that are too magical.
Yep.
Dominic Dorfmeister, TK Dodo, who
Mm-hmm.
manages React Query for us,
Yep.
he just gave a great talk on designing APIs and that it's very difficult. And one of the things that he talks about there that I really like is that you have to design an API that is so easy to use out of the gate that
Mm-hmm.
most anybody can use it and you just get advantages without any extra effort.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have to have the ability for that same API to grow into the most advanced use cases that
Mm-hmm.
you can think of. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really difficult to make that balance, but I think that's what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, instead of relying on really coarse grained APIs like use server directives and use cache directives. We just create functions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we do this for multiple reasons. For the TypeScript experience is better. You can offer customizations on things that you can't do with something like a directive or even just a higher order component or anything like that. Or,
Mm-hmm.
we just wanted to take the magic out of the parts that you interact with and keep the magic in the parts that you don't have to worry about.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Um, but the API design is something that we really spend a lot of time thinking about.
And I love that because I think APIs are so difficult to design and to come up with a design that works for so many developers that they know exactly how it works. And I feel like the TanStack started done an incredible job with that. I knew exactly what needed to be done to opt into, and I think that's really beautiful.
I have a surprise coming for TanStack Start specifically. So our first version of server functions
Mm-hmm.
was pretty simple because
Yeah.
it's in alpha right now.
Yeah.
But we're very close to launching the beta version, and I've
Ooh.
worked very closely with Alex and Julius over at TRPC.
Mm-hmm.
And even talking with other framework developers and people who have built RPCs before, Ryan Carniato at Solid.js, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something that came up was that people really love tools like TRPC
Mm-hmm.
um, because they offer so much value out of the box. I wanted something similar for TanStack Start, so the next version is actually going to ship server functions
Mm-hmm.
with a very an in-house API that looks a lot like TRPC on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes with input validation built in.
Wow.
So you can have input validation from client to server. It
Mm-hmm.
has middleware baked into it, and you
Mm-hmm.
can write your own middleware for both the client and the server, which
Mm-hmm.
is very powerful. And it has support for just really simple ways of managing the request and response lifecycle.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the TypeScript is just outstanding.
Yeah.
So, which is what TRPC is really great at TypeScript as well. So,
Yeah.
we've worked closely with them to build something that looks a lot like it, but is a little
Mm-hmm.
more generic and built into TanStack Start. I think that
Mm-hmm.
people are really going to like it.
Yeah, for sure. Especially like, I'm a huge fan of TRPC and I know so are so many devs. I think having some familiarity really helps to adopt new things as well. So I really love that it's baked into it. So I just want to sort of like circle back in terms of like, just like users who are working in their 9 to 5 and they already have an existing framework and they want to adopt, they have like maybe let's a very interactive application and they want to adopt and take advantage of all the service stuff that's coming up, but their application is very client heavy. So what would you say should be their approach to adopt anything in the tan stack, I would say, ecosystem? Should they go for router, or should they go for tan stack start, or so on? What would you say should be their approach?
Well, I mean, if you can't change anything about your architecture, and using TanStack Query is already a really big improvement over
Mm-hmm.
what most people are using still today.
Yeah.
Usually it's like Redux or something like that. So you can get so much value out of just using TanStack Query.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in a position to upheave, like change your architecture, then there's two paths. If you're going greenfield, if there's something
Mm-hmm.
new, then I obviously would say as soon as we're in beta, I would start with TanStack Start.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to give you the most open options and avenues of where you can take your application.
Mm-hmm.
All the way from just being an SPA on the client only, or bringing in all of the server side logic that you would want. There's always a question too of, that would require being able to deploy somewhere that gives you server capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to assume in our industry right now that everybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, of course I could deploy to Netlify or to Vercel or to Cloudflare and have this server environment at my control. But there are so many companies out there, enterprise businesses, that they won't even let front-end developers run back-end code at all. They won't deploy node servers. It's policy. They don't want back-end logic being controlled by front-end developers. That's why they have API teams and people who are designated just for that. So there are companies that you're just not going to have that option, and you're going to be forced just to use front-end tech, statically deployed, CDN SPAs. And if
Yeah.
that's the case, then again, you'll get 95% of the way there if you can adopt TanStack router, because most of the value is coming from there. It's type safe routing. It's wonderful state management. It's isomorphic. You can get so much value. I think some of the most important parts of it out of just using the router. So I mean, even at Nozzle, it's not using Start yet, and it probably won't use Start for a while until we have a good excuse to get server logic in there, because we have a back-end team. We have people that, are writing that. But I have other newer projects that we're working on that a full stack solution makes a lot of sense. So we're starting with Start there. But Nozzle uses router, has been using TanStack router for a long time, because it just makes sense. And I've been through those router migrations several times over the last decade. I've moved through all the different versions of React Router. I've moved back and forth between React Router to Gatsby and Next.js. And yes, it can be daunting sometimes to make those changes. You also need to realize that there's a lot of convergence right now in the industry to things like file-based routing, and just good componentization of logic. And personally, moving projects between things like React Router, Next.js, and TanStack Router, if you've written your code well to begin with, it's usually not that difficult to do. I even had a router before TanStack Router called React Navigation. And it was a very gradual, easy upgrade path as well. There are some instances where you could justify running both at the same time. I actually have people who are running TanStack Router and React Router in the same applications, and running TanStack Router in Next.js applications as well. In a dashboard scenario, they kind of say, oh yeah, /dashboard, we're going to put that in TanStack Router and just kind of manage everything there. So there is an incremental adoption story, but I think one of the things is people quickly realize how great the TypeScript experience is, and instead of it becoming a chore to move things over into the new router, they start seeing that it's actually really fun and just really productive to move things over. We incentivize you to put things into the router because we can offer you really a lot of guarantees around your code, if it's controlled by the router.
So one thing I love about TanStack overall is just the TypeScript support, like you mentioned. It's just there's no second guessing if your routing is going to break in production. I would say that is the assurity I love as a developer. I would love to know, how did you achieve that? I'm just curious as a developer, how did you achieve such a robust coverage with TypeScript? And because I can give a guarantee to other developer it's not gonna break, and that's not something that I take it lightly. So I would love to know your decisions there.
Well, in the beginning, I was trying to retrofit other routers with types. The last one that I tried with was React Router 6. I was using it in beta for I think a year, almost 2 years. And what I found out was that even when I built my own router React location, I didn't do it with TypeScript, and I tried to add the types back in after the fact, and I found that you can't force those guarantees onto a system that isn't architected to offer those guarantees. It's just not possible. And so what I had to do was take the entire routing architecture that had come to know for like modern front end apps, and just completely rewrite it from scratch using TypeScript, not just writing it in TypeScript, but relying on inference 100% of the time and making sure that all of the type information could flow through the application unidirectionally. And that was a real challenge. It took me 2 to 3 years to even figure out how that was even possible. But once I figured that out, I almost had the entire router written with just types and no runtime logic yet. It was just a fake types. The functions had nothing in them. It was all just types. And I wanted to make sure that I could use the router almost with just TypeScript annotations.
Yeah.
Once I found that pattern, then I knew that at that point it's just implementing the runtime features of those type constraints, adding in some tests to make sure that we're honoring those. We actually have tests for the types as well, so we don't have regressions there. But it turns out if you start from scratch thinking about TypeScript and building your application to utilize TypeScript, you can offer some of those guarantees.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that is awesome that we can give that guarantee for sure. And architecturally, this just gives me a very good story for like, if you make the right architecture decisions, then you can do great things. Just like, we have with TanStack Start and Router and so on as well. So I have a question about React server components. Um, I know, like, just a few months ago, I know that you were trying to get a working solution for React server components. From that to now feeling very confident to shipping or very close to shipping React server components. How was the journey there, and how did you go about sort of designing that elegant solution for TanStack?
Well, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not super confident about it yet, which is why it's not in the beta yet, and it might not
Yeah.
even be in the 1.0 to be honest. But the reality is that server components are pretty complex to implement. They
Yeah.
come with a whole new set of constraints that you have to think about on the server. And luckily, I have prior art and other people who are concerned about this. Nikhil Saraf, who has built Vinci, has done a lot of deep dives into server components. Same with Dev Agarwal. He has offered a lot of advice there. Most of our experimentation has been figuring out what primitives need to be in place to support them. And for a while, it didn't make sense to have React server components without the server functions piece that we ended up adding to TanStack Start. Because it turns out that building a server component, I don't know, people like to think about them as components, a specific type of component, but they're really not. Really, all it is just partially rendered React code that you partially render on the server, send to the client, and then finish the job there. So it's really just a special protocol to send React component code that has been partially rendered to the client. And you need a server client boundary to do that.
Yeah.
One that can understand the React server component payload syntax. And when I learned that, I realized that server components are really just another kind of data.
Yeah.
It would be like instead of JSON, it's RSC, but it's
Yeah.
still just data that you're getting from the server and then showing to your users somehow. When I thought about it from that perspective, I realized that, well, if they're not really that special when it gets to the client, then why can't we just use traditional tools like that we've been using to manage server state?
Yeah.
So I thought, well, you could return a React server component payload in a use query call in React Query. You could return it in a loader for a route. Heck, you could just call it, a fetch. You could just call a fetch endpoint and return some React server component logic. And what are the primitives that we need to render that? So our approach, which isn't totally solidified yet, but it's that you have utilities at your disposal to take that payload and render it, and we'll help you do that. And we're giving you the tools to manage that payload in the same way that you would manage any other data, like you would with a loader or use query. And it's just going to be that simple, which really what that boils down to is all you have to do is return JSX or React elements from a server function. And that's React server components.
I don't think anyone has so beautifully explained how React Server components work. And to give you full credit, I ran a workshop right before this, as you have heard about it. After listening to you talking about React Server components and how you implemented it, and or not implemented or implementing it, um, I actually understood how they work. And that is beautiful because that's what every framework needs to do. There shouldn't be so much magic, right?
Yeah.
And magic is good to an extent, but
Yeah.
if you know, you would be able to make more informed decisions, which is what it sounds like.
I think I think something that becomes very simple is right now through Next.js, even through Remix. I think their approach, or React Router 7 or whatever, is most people expect that you get back a component from the server,
Yep.
and you don't. You're getting back a readable stream or a stream of text. That's what you're getting back.
Yeah.
That is what the React Server Component payload is. It's just a stream of text that's just streaming into you. No different than the text streaming in from, GPT or something. And that's what you need to be able to manipulate and cache is this stream of text.
Yep.
And when you think about it that way, then what we do is we're probably going to provide you a utility that's just called render RSC. That you just take that stream and you hand it to render RSC, and it will turn that stream of text into a component for you. And in that way, like, I like exposing the primitives of how these patterns and technologies work, but at the same time offering you these composable utilities that say, okay, now I understand how they work now. And is there a lot of complexity in taking that string and turning it into a component? Absolutely. That's the part we're going to take care of for you with a utility. Is it complex to stream and hydrate RSCs across the wire for SSR? Yes. And we'll offer you utilities and help to get that done. But, I like to think magic is okay, but if I were to learn magic, we're in the spirit of Halloween here. If I were to learn magic, I wouldn't want somebody to hand me, a single magical black box that I don't understand how it works. I would want to be handed a toolkit of a bunch of different things that are all magical that I know how to put together and rearrange how I want.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Just in the spirit of Halloween, like a magical potion, a witch hat, and all those magical tools to combine it all together. Yeah, that's awesome. So I would love to learn a little bit more about your journey on your open source journey. And I would love to know, like, what advice would you be willing to give someone to basically not replicate, but to just like follow your footsteps? There are so many people listening, will listen to this chat of ours and wonder how can they do what you are doing. So what would you say, what advice would you give them? Because I feel like you are someone I really look up to, and you have done so much. I've used your tools and it's just incredible. Like, they are just beautifully designed, and I love to give them as references. So what advice would you give someone who want to be you?
I would say make sure you're challenging yourself. I think that most people, even me, if I were just to set out today and say, I want to build a new open source library, it doesn't really work that way. That's kind of like saying, I'm going to start a new business, but you don't really know what you're going to start, right? In a way, you need to feel pain. You need to suffer yourself
Yeah.
around a problem before you fully understand it. And there's no better way to do that than immersing yourself in very challenging situations. For me, it was diving headfirst into a really complex application and having to do it all by myself. I've been almost the only front end developer at Nozzle for a very long time. And so that forced me to grow and to learn, and I was able to feel the pains of a lot of different areas and facets of front end software development at the same time. And I believe that gave me a unique perspective on how it could be better. You know, you can obviously try and set out to build a library or build a product or a business, but if you don't understand the pain that you're solving and you haven't felt it yourself, you might not be the best person to solve that problem. That's been the biggest reason of where I am today, is just the pain that I have felt going through this, journey of building software and my unique circumstances. Yeah, it's all about just learning and iterating, and until one day you're like, oh my gosh, this would be so simple if there was just one hook called use query that just synchronized all of this for me. Let's build it. I built it internally at Nozzle first. It was actually powered by Redux. And then I took Redux out, and then I started making it open source. And it worked so well for me. It solved so many problems that I was having internally. I was like, well, I've got to send this out into the world. And once I did, other people who were feeling that same pain immediately saw the value.
Yeah, for sure. That's really awesome. I feel like there's really good advice that once you go through the pain yourself, you would be able to empathize and create a good solution for your problem because you are your user. It's like dog fooding your own stuff and really, you know, going from there.
Yeah. And I mean, you can use that to kind of tell the future a little bit too. Like, what have I been doing for the last, couple of years? I've been building open source libraries, and even that's painful. So you'll see some of the tools that we've built at TanStack are tools to help you build libraries.
Yeah.
We have state management that works across frameworks, and we have a config package that is what we use to distribute our software that you can use to distribute your own software as well. We're not doing this yet, but I can definitely imagine in the future that we might publish utilities or helpers just like Vinci to help you build your own framework. Because that's the struggle that we have been working on for the last little while.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for that advice. That's really good for anyone wanting to be where you are at today. So, thank you so much for being part of my channel and this doing this interview. I just want to ask you, do you have any like last words before we wrap up? Where can people find you? What's next with TanStack Start? If you want to tease anything or share anything big, now's the time.
Well, you should definitely go try Start out. It's in alpha. It will be in beta here hopefully soon. The router has been out and stable for client-side applications for over a year and a half now. It's very, very cool. You should definitely use that. I mean, I'm going to be very bold. I'm starting to be a little more bold about it, but I just can't truly recommend you use any other router now. There's too many benefits, and the developer experience and user experience is so much better that I can't recommend using any other router at this point. And then lastly, if I were to tease anything, TanStack Start is just the beginning. I have a lot of other cool features and things in the works that I think are not just gonna, be cool for some advanced use cases, but could change the way we think about components and building routed applications. I'm working on some things around parallel routes. I'm working on some things around full stack components. And that's just what I'm working on. I have a lot of contributors at TanStack who are working on other new things as well that I don't know if I'm ready to share those yet, but we have a lot in the pipeline. And we're just trying to stay focused on one thing and get it out and make it great before we move on to the next. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm in the Discord for TanStack, so it's always buzzing with so many new ideas and just a lot of different cool things that people are talking about. So yeah, thank you so much, Tanner, for being part of my channel. And this was an amazing chat. I learned so much about RSCs and how you think about architecture design to all the way to giving your advice. So thank you so much for being part of it.
Everyone should go and follow or sponsor the people who help me maintain TanStack. They're very, very talented people. Every last one of them deserves, in many cases, more recognition than I do for how much they have put into TanStack as a brand. So please go find these individuals. There's too many of them to name now. They're very, very wonderful people, and I wouldn't be where I am today without them. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.